So let's go ahead and open it up to questions. Any questions out there? Yes.
Well, Jay, in Cincinnati back in 2004, they began a couple of different changes. You cited one example, and I'm looking for others. For example, Cisco got very involved in Cincinnati School District. They did a number of different models. Not only they began charter, or the idea of charters, but they put in Medea schools. They did a number of different strategies. What other success stories are coming out of there? I know that Humana was heavily involved. Larry Pepper from Procter & Gamble was just intrinsically engaged in that district. What else has come out of that?
Sure. I left my email on the sheet that you have, and you're welcome to send me, if you send me a note, I'll be glad to send you the Education Week article, which lists the 10 things that I'm now going to describe. But you're absolutely right. There were 10 key things. The first was that there were a variety of business partnerships, of which this is only one example, but there were many, many others. There was the kind of thing, GE was deeply involved, GE was deeply and remains deeply involved in the training of teachers. So there were a number of business partnerships. There were a number of social service agencies that joined with the district. And I want to be clear, the progress we're talking about is with the Cincinnati district. We're not talking in this instance about charter public schools in Cincinnati. So there were a number of business partnerships. There were a number of social service agencies. For example, in one of the high schools, Withrow, which also made huge progress, there was a relationship, going back to the word that Penny used, friendship, between a woman who was the principal of a high school, a small high school within a building, and a social service agency. So they agreed that the high school would provide space to the social service agency, and the social service agency would move several people into the building to work with the kids and the faculties. And they were able to help with some very challenging problems, help a number of youngsters. So anyway, the first was clear and explicit, measurable goals, just two, the ones that I mentioned. The second was the opportunity, thanks to the Gates Foundation, to go visit some of the nation's outstanding district and charter public schools. So the conversation changed from, can we do this, to which of these strategies will we employ, because we have seen schools very similar to the ones in Cincinnati that are making huge progress with the youngsters that are achieving the results. So the second was the opportunity to see real live breathing examples of outstanding district and charter public schools around the United States. The third thing were the partnerships between the school and the business community. The fourth thing was that there were financial rewards for schools that made progress. And I mean for the entire school, including the custodians, including the faculty, including the school leadership, including the people who sit at the front desk, secretaries and other administrative assistants. So there were financial rewards for progress. Not everybody was expected to get to here in a year, but the schools that were making the most financial progress were financially rewarded. The sixth was that Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, from the very beginning, was extremely supportive of this effort. They saw that the district was losing students to charter public schools and subsequently under a voucher program. And so the Federation said, hey, we're being given the opportunity to improve our schools. We have these partnerships. We have all these other things. The Federation was extremely, and has remained extremely supportive of these kinds of changes. The seventh change was that they saw young people as people who could make a difference for youngsters. So, for example, at this school, Taft, that you just saw, I think this is an expression in Georgia, it's an expression in Minnesota, Sunday go to meeting. It were almost revivals. It was almost the sense of a revival when they brought back high school kids to Taft and several other schools who had struggled, but with the help of the tutors, had passed the statewide test, had graduated, and were now in colleges and universities. And I mean, these people wailed and they cried and they talked with each other. That is to say, the graduates talked with the kids in the high schools about how it really was worth graduating from high school, and they were able to get different kinds of jobs, and they were able to make progress in college because they had really stuck to it. Remember the Gambate Award? It was that principle, but it had the high school kids in a variety of ways in service programs so that they began to see themselves in different kinds of ways. So they thought they learned that they could accomplish more than they really wanted. So, for example, some of them working with senior citizens. Some of them had internships in corporations. There was one youngster who was a computer whiz who helped a local corporation figure out some computer problems that it had. But there were a vast array of service learning programs that were going on. There was extensive communication with the community. including the faith community. There were a number of meetings with churches, and frankly, many of them African American churches, but many, many churches throughout the community to talk about what was going on, to talk about what was trying to be accomplished, and to give people a sense of hope. Because I don't have to tell anybody in this room, there's a plenty of doom and gloom around. There was constant communication about what the progress that was made, and there was constant discussion about how we could refine and improve these programs. And every one of the programs, including the program at Taft, had this intensive evaluation so that there was a continuous improvement kind of thing. I think I'm up to about 8, and there are 2 more that I'm momentarily not remembering. But completely agree that there were many corporations involved, not just Cincinnati Bell. And one was a focus on professional development, which you mentioned, and it was a focus on a couple of areas: numeracy, literacy, and how to deal with today's kids. So that it wasn't 1 week we'll have workshop on this, and the next week we'll have a workshop on something entirely different. The faculty, through their union design teams, and the administration decided on the key areas in each building. There were work plans, there were specific goals, but there was focused professional development. So it wasn't in a vast array of areas, it was on 2 or 3 areas in each building, which helped make progress. I think that's 9, and I'm missing one, but you're absolutely right that there were a series of things that happened. There was no one magic bullet.
And Stephanie, if I can pile on to that, one of the grants that the GE Foundation has is in Atlanta. Another one that we have is in Cincinnati, and it began towards the end of the time period that was measured. And what we've learned with the GE work is that many of these communities have different elements of all of the items that Cincinnati had, and we have been trying to figure out how do we import them into the other cities in which we have similar kind of grants and replicate them in ways that make sense. So I know that there's been conversation here about the different groups that plug in. One of the things I think Cincinnati does through at least one of the organizations is the Cincinnati Business Council, is that the businesses in the funding community and then the service communities, they actually talk together and they try to figure out what schools are we in, what are we working on, where do those things meet, so that we don't step on each other and we don't create either redundancy, duplication, or God forbid, the worst would be gaps. And so if I can offer anything that would help point to maybe some of the elements of success, it's that communication where people will say, I'm working in this particular school, I'm working in this particular area. My focus happens to be, GERs is around math and science, but we will work with other funders, with other corporations who work on literacy, who work on the arts, who work on just elementary or just high school, and we try to figure out so that we play in a space together. Is that what we don't want to do is overwhelm a school, overwhelm a principal, overwhelm a series of teachers.
And just to add to that, there's an organization in Cincinnati that's sprung up as part of all of these partners coming in called Strive Cincinnati, and what they do specifically is work to connect the different data streams on student performance, particularly around what types of interventions and programs in and out of the school are specific students exposed to. And then they've created a dashboard where both the business partners, the after-school providers, and other partners can input information on what a student's done during that day, that week, that year, how they're progressing towards meeting certain academic benchmarks. Teachers can plug in, or the district data is actually automatically plugged in every night or every couple of nights. And it's created a dashboard where you can go in and see over all possible interventions, what is the student receiving? And it also gives you a red flag when there's a gap, where there's a student who is running into some pretty serious problems, for example, in math, and needs some help. So what interventions are out there that they could be plugged into, that what's servicing that particular student's school? Is that student involved in any of those? And is there an opportunity for he or she to become involved in them? So they've done some really great work to help coordinate all of the services that are going on to make sure they have the largest impact.
I just want to make a brief comment and then love to hear from you. You just said that it's important not to overwhelm the school. And I think that's a really important insight. I've worked with educators around the country. I don't wish to embarrass anybody, but some educators have come up with a term called bohica. Bohica means bend over, here it comes again, as in here's the reform of the week, or here's the reform of the year. And as an inner city assistant principal, I was sometimes frustrated because all these groups wanted to help, and we have limited capacity. Those of you who have been school administrators, those of you who are school administrators know there are only a certain number of hours a day, and help can be useful or it can become overwhelming. So that's one of the reasons I believe strongly in focus, and I believe it's important for people to collaboratively decide what are the focus and what are the priorities. This is one of the things that business has a lot to teach education about, and sometimes education people are really nice and say, okay, we'll try that, okay, we'll try that, okay, we'll try that, and it just becomes overwhelming. So the point that you made about not wanting to overwhelm people, and the point that Penny made about focus, I think are critical, and I think it's important in these kinds of collaborations for both sides to be able to say, these 2 or 3 things are our priority for this year, we will work on some other things next year, but we're not going to try to do everything this year. That is one of the most frustrating things for people in education. What I hear from business people is, that's absolutely part of the way you operate. You don't try to do everything. You do a strategic plan, you pick a focus, you pick priorities, and that's what you work on for the 6-month plan or the year plan or whatever.
Other questions? Yes.
You're talking about professional development, and there's the research regarding changing teacher practice is not very promising or very positive. So do you have some examples of successful practice, professional development that has actually changed practice in the classroom, and could you share that?
Yes, and Penny is, I'm going to refer again to Penny and some work that she and some of her colleagues did. There's an organization called CPRE. Penny, what does CPRE stand for?
Consortium for Policy Research in Education.
So they have done some really good research on the precise question that you asked, and we read that and we learned from that. So here were 4 or 5 things that came out of that research. 1, and focus. A clear agreement about a handful of skills that you're going to try to work on over a couple of years. 2 or 3, as opposed to being all over the map. So focus. Secondly, really high quality presenters. Third, doing with educators what's done in the best corporations, which is not expecting that people are going to do in-service at the end of the day after they're exhausted, which is often done in schools. We're going to have an after-school in-service with all due respect to college professors and so on, with Professor Clank, who is going to come and lecture us. Really high-quality presenters who have been rated very highly by other educators. So a lot of due diligence about the quality of the presenters. Fourth, asking people as a part of professional development to try some things and then come back 2 months later and discuss how it's happened with some assessment of what they've done, so that there is, going back to what Penny said, refinement. People are introduced to a new approach, not 10 or 20, but 2 or 3. They're given some opportunity to try that, and then they come back with the presenter, and they have an opportunity to reflect what went well, what could have been done better. We're doing this, for example, with a book called Teach Like a Champion, which I strongly recommend. We've worked with this book with both district and charter folks. It comes out of the Uncommon Schools. And we've had both district and charter folks learning with these people. And they also, by the way, along with the book, have a video that shows how people are applying these practices, which we discussed. But then we have people come back and say, all right, we're going to try these 3 strategies, and then we'll be back in 3 months to talk about what went well, what needs to be improved. So those are some of the principles that come out of the study that CPRE did. And is that study still on the website?
Yes, I think it is. And I always go by the principle. It used to be for professional development. Teachers came, they sat, they got out. All 3. Best professional development is done at the school, tailored to the needs of specific teachers. They don't sit. It needs to be interactive. And they don't get, they are not empty vessels. So it's anything that gets teachers up and moving. observation in the classroom, back and forth among people who attended the training. So much more active, much more frequent, and much more tailored to the needs of the particular teachers.
And there are a range of publications that NGA has also put out on state policies to help support high-quality professional development and different publications around effective leadership and effective teaching. So those are all available on the website. It's nga.org.
One other brief thing, because I know other people want to comment. This will be brief. In some cases, corporations in Cincinnati and in some other communities that we work with have said, all right, we have a nice training facility. Would you like to use it? We did something, our center did something really stupid 2 weeks ago, which is that we did a training session in a school in the cafeteria with extremely uncomfortable, I wouldn't even call them chairs, but the kids they're designed to have the kids sit on them for 15 or 20 minutes at lunch, and they're not very comfortable for 15, 20 minutes. You're sitting in comfortable chairs. When people do high quality staff development, professional development, whether it's in the corporate world or the nonprofit world, the soundings are comfortable, they're pleasant. We've had some wonderful opportunities from corporations in our state and in some other states where people say, why don't you come to our corporate training facility? And the way you treat people is critical, whether it's kids, students, or adults. If people are in a beautiful facility, if they're welcomed, if they're not, if they're comfortable, if it's not too hot or not too cold, they feel like they're being treated as people of value. And the way you treat people has an enormous impact on how they take in and use the information that's being shared.
So we're going to take a couple more questions, and then we're going to give you an opportunity to interact with some of the folks that you're sitting around. So the gentleman in the front, and then the question behind him.
Andy, the question we talked about the GET program with APS. Who's the point person? Who do you work with at the individual school? Is there a liaison with an APS that you go to that then coordinates these volunteers as well as with training with teachers from South Carolina? Or do you go directly to the principal and try to work it out? How does that work? Especially, I'm looking from a charter school perspective, how do we tap into that? Is that through a representative within APS, or is it going directly to GE?
So it's all of the above. The part of the, let me just give a little context if I may. In every district that we work in, specifically with APS, we've had a long history with individual schools before we ever made big time commitments. And we've been a partner with the Maynard Jackson High School for closing on 20 years. And we built relationships with the principals there and the teachers through a lot of mentoring and tutoring, through family Saturday afternoons where we would help the families learn how to use computers. We did all kinds of things in the 80s and the 90s, and then in 2001, I believe the GE Foundation gave that school $1 million, the Maynard Jackson High School, to help improve the graduation rate in that school, which was, I think, in the low 20s, and now it's, I believe, in the high 80s, if not higher, through a lot of programmatic work. And so in kind of keeping with the theme, there was a relationship built. It was a long-term relationship. It came and went through managers because the institutions found value, and it wasn't dependent upon a person, and then that led to deeper investment over time. The success that we saw come out of Maynard Jackson High School helped us think through investing at the district level through APS. And when that grant was awarded 3 years ago, part of the grant that the foundation gave was to have a local employee, me, be on full-time loan and administer the grant from a GE perspective. And that's the same in all the cities in which we invest. So it is my full-time job to manage the APS grant that we have, and I work with folks in central office, with the superintendent, with the deputy, and specifically with the math and science leadership there. And then it's my business to get to know the principals, to get to know the coaches, to get to know the teachers to the extent that I can. There's 3,000 of them. It's a lot of people to try to get to know, but I do the best I can. And really understand What is it that we're doing when it comes to curriculum and PD? We don't pretend to prescribe any kind of curriculum or any kind of PD because, remember, we're the business partner. We make gas turbines, we make aircraft engines, we make locomotives, healthcare equipment. We don't make curriculum. We don't make PD. But we really want to push on the district and ask questions around their strategic plan as to why do we want to do this? What's it going to do? I mean, is it going to help teachers improve their content knowledge? Is it helping with their pedagogy? And in a way, kind of be that critical friend that says, help me understand why investing our money like this is a great idea. And that's a big portion of my day job. The other part of the job is working with principals, with teachers, with the area superintendents to understand what else is going on in their business so that we can, to the extent that it's appropriate, apply GE practices or GE tools and adapt them for the school. And so, for example, there's going to be a new deputy superintendent come on, and I was speaking with Superintendent Davis last week, and I said, would it be helpful, because we've done it in the past, to have a new manager assimilation? And Errol looked at me and he says, Cammie, that kind of sounds like a good idea. He says, tell me a little bit more about it. And I said, every time we have a manager in GE come into a new team, there is a process in the first few weeks that they go through where you get their staff together and you ask a series of questions, and people are in different rooms, and then they come together and they answer them. And the intent of this is to accelerate teaming, because if people can put the white elephants on the table of what happened in the past, what was good, what was bad, what was ugly, what do each other need to know about each other, what assumptions do each other have, and put spotlights on it, teams can accelerate faster because the stuff that's on the table that nobody ever wants to talk about becomes very transparent. It's a GE practice that we put out there all the time. We use it all the time. And I said, hey, would it be of any benefit? Errol said, yeah, I think so. So we'll take that. That's a GE practice that we adapt with the district. I'm not alone. We use a lot of the change acceleration processes that GE has as part of our repertoire, the project management skills, and we will work with the principals in the executive kind of mentoring type program that the Atlanta Education Fund sponsors, and our GE managers will mentor some of that stuff. Our partnerships will, an example that we have with Cincinnati, it happens to be the topic of the day even though we sit in Atlanta, about 3 years ago when there's a $25 million grant that GE, the same program that I have, gave to the CPS schools. The superintendent at the time was looking at their real estate portfolio and said, I've got to look at my student enrollment. I've got to try to figure out, what do I do about putting kids in right places and staffing and this, that, and the other thing. And my peer in Cincinnati said, well, what do you mean by that? And the superintendent said, well, I've got all these schools and I got to figure out, do I close them? Do I move them? What do I do? And Elizabeth said, well, why don't I bring, at GE, we have a team that looks at what we call rooftops, which are the buildings that we lease and that we own. And at all times around the world, we're trying to figure out, do we need more real estate, office space? Do we need more? Do we need less? Is businesses growing here? What's happening? And so we said, well, we can get Frank to come here and look at your real estate portfolio and see if that would be of benefit. And so Frank came in and figured out a plan with Rose at the time of, hey, let's look at this, and helped end up saving the district about $15 million. Because she could lease some things, she could sell some things, she could close and consolidate, based upon taking the tools that we would normally use in private practice and adapt them there. So the repertoire of who and what, this particular innovation idea that Kristen and Lauren and Bonnie asked me to talk about, I'm administering right now because it's a brand new pilot. I mean, it's something we just thought up. We don't have any measurable results because we're in the middle of doing it, but it's just an idea. Some of these other things that we've done for years and years with Maynard Jackson, we have more data that says, hey, tutoring really works, mentoring really works. We happen to do a lot of it electronically now with email and calls and conference calls and telepresence and things like that, because that's the new way, is not always being in the same site, but it works. So I hope that's a long answer to your question, but we bring the entire toolkit to the district, and then we try to figure out, because we're on the ground every day with them, where can we help them and how can we apply it over time, so again, it's digestible. It's not, it's not drinking by the fire hose. I hope that helps.
I have a question about the professional development also partnership GE has with APS. After teachers participate in the summer professional development at one of your locations with the turbines, et cetera, does GE participate in translating that experience into curriculum, into the classroom, or did you just leave that to APS, or was it done in the course of the experience, or how did GE participate in making sure that that experience was translated into curriculum and instruction?
So that's a great question. It's a work in progress. Through the GE Foundation grant, we have partnered with Georgia Tech to try to help us to do that, because we know we have no idea how to take a standard and make it come alive. We don't know how to do that. But we do know why iridium is important in building gas turbines, because it doesn't melt when a turbine rotates 3,000 times a second and is under thousands, 2,000 or 3,000 degrees of heat at any point in time, of which could melt any particular composite that's rotating. I mean, we get that. Iridium's one of those composites that we really like. And so what we try to do is offer up the case, this is the hypothesis right now. Offer up the case study and then have Georgia Tech work with the DOE and the science folks and the APS curriculum folks to take the case study and figure out how does it align to the standards so that what we're going through matches. I don't want to step out of my lane because I'm not going to be any good at it. I'm good at the business part of it. Georgia Tech and APS are really good at the curriculum part, and we're just trying to figure out. And the teachers, to tell you the truth, are part of the pilot. We're asking them, is this meaningful? Are you getting anything out of this? You're learning something, but can you apply it to anything that you're doing? And when they say no, we go back and we say, all right, well, we got to go figure out there isn't a deep enough tie, and the teacher shouldn't have to do that if we can figure out ways to facilitate it. So we'll see. TBD.
Okay, the gentleman in the back.
I have two questions for you. First of all, I love the analogy that you use. My first question is, what is your technical title? I see your name and you work for GE. And how were you able to get the school system to feel comfortable? Because I think the private sector, the business community has a lot to offer. Sometimes school systems are a little sensitive because of territory. And what you bring to the table is very helpful. So how did you get AP to be willing to just, and I think the current superintendent might have even worked for GE at one point in time.
He's a customer, yeah.
Which helped. How did you tear that barrier down?
A lot of it is relationships, and I think it goes to what Penny and Joe have already said that I would second, and that is understanding what each person's going to get out of this. There has to be some trust, certainly. And there's got to be trust that behind closed doors. Like when you close the door, you have a candid conversation. Hey, you know what? I really need some help in X, Y, Z. And then the other partner listens and says, okay, I don't get it. You're not speaking my language. And you really arm wrestle, what's the problem about? And is there a place where business can help? And that's got to be really candid. It's got to be behind closed doors, and it's got to take a long time. And you probably do it very, very slowly, because almost with anything that I've experienced in working with APS and the DOE and the governor's office through any of these efforts has been because we've built kind of that relationship over time. We've done small, digestible projects together. We've had different conversations. And sometimes the really difficult ones are the best ones to have, because as you work through the problems, then there's even more groundwork that you've laid to fall back on. And then the other thing in that relationship that we have is an element of risk. And what I mean by that is if a district or a principal when we had the grant with Maynard Jackson, or even in any of the mentoring work, if we can't work with the superintendent or the principal or the teacher, whoever is on the other side of the table with us, and use our money or our resources, our employees' time to take a risk, well then when can they ever do it? It seems to me, and it seems to us right now, and like I said, we've been doing this for 50 years, but that doesn't mean that we necessarily know very much, in this space, because we're not in education, we're in business, we're in the industry. But right now we're thinking is that if you can't take some risk with the money and the time and the resources to do these kind of pilot type work, well then when are you going to get to do it? Because the taxpayer money that comes in, has to be used programmatically to meet the school's needs, the district needs, that how to do so well. But chances are that if the administrator, the teacher, the principal has an idea that says, what, if I just had a half a day, if I just had a couple of people from business, if I just had fill in the blank, I might be able to try something on for size and see what works. And I think that as a business partner, if we can come to the table and create a safe environment to do some of that, then from there we can figure out, well, did it succeed? What did it look like? Can we scale it and determine whether it should be something that we continue to go forward with? Does that help? Did I answer your question?
I guess my question is, are you teaching them to fish, or are you giving them the fish? Meaning when you're calling in your staff, because they're going to leave with a plan.
Yep.
But are they more knowledgeable about how the plan came about, and can they do it when you're gone?
It's both. And in the beginning, depending upon what it is, we will bring fish, because there may be times for example, the rooftops exercise that occurred in Cincinnati. Cincinnati, at least I don't think, I don't know, I'm not there, and I talked to Elizabeth quite a bit, but as near as I can tell, they don't need a rooftop expert. They probably don't need that. So we can offer that. But when it comes to leadership development, the teacher skills, the PD, we will have failed in our effort to support the districts and APS if we didn't help them be better fishermen. That's the way that we view it right now. Does that help?
So I know there are other questions. Joe will be here for the rest of the meeting. Cammie will also be here, and they'll be happy to answer additional questions. I do want to give you an opportunity to collaborate amongst yourselves. So if you could join me in thanking both Cammie and Joe.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to ask you to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes talking with the group of people around you about some of what you've heard today, reflecting back on that, and how you can take that back to your school, to your company, to your district, and build some partnerships there. And we will be coming back. There will be folks called on to talk or to report out on the conversation. So there is some accountability to this. All right? Thank you.
So the first question is on how do you approach us? Mm-hmm. All right. Whew, that's a kind of a loaded question. I think that there's going to be a couple of different ways you can approach businesses if you're a school or a district. And they're going to come at different levels. If you're a building principal or a teacher, then tap into the parents in your class and tap into the parents in your grade level classes, or the kind of the teachers who are your colleagues, or if you've got principal networks. There is no better enthusiastic business person than a parent who will help a teacher impact their kid. And I think that may take some time, but to get to know those parents and have open houses or have breakfasts, have coffees to figure out who these people are, and then get a sense of what do they do and tap what their expertise is. So if somebody is in logistics, oh, okay, well, you're in logistics. Let me figure out if I could plug you into a certain part of the curriculum or a certain study that would be interesting. If you're a finance person, can we plug you into some of the math? If you're in science, if you're a musician, if you're in the arts, can we somehow figure out what your personal competency is as the parent and then plug you into where my plan is in my class or in my building? And that's, I probably should have gone and said that first, but you got to have a plan. One of the things that Joe mentioned is that businesses don't do anything without a strategic plan in general. If we're going to walk down a path, it's very important for us to know what is it that you need us to do? Where are you going? And then let us try to figure out, are there ways that we can help, whether we be the parent in the classroom or in the building. And then if you're thinking about it more from a strategic plan, if you're the administrator, to have that plan well thought out. And don't pick too many things. And then be very, very honest with me. Especially if you have companies or other partners that you're approaching at the same time or working with at the same time. Because we talk. The Gates Foundation is very active in Georgia. The Blank Foundation, the Wallace Foundation, we talk. And we really don't want duplication, and we really want to know what each other funds. And if you can come to me with a strategic plan or a blueprint, a framework that says, hey, this is what I want to do with my teachers or my principals, my school, my district. Is there anything in here that would catch your eye? That's a great way to kind of start. If you don't have a plan, then think about using one of your parents who's in strategy or in development and say, hey, you guys do this in industry. Do you have a couple of people who can come and help me develop a plan? These are the 3 things that I want to work on, no more than 3 over the course of a couple of years. And then let us kind of figure that out, because there's things that businesses will want to do that we have interests in, and if it doesn't work, that's fine too. Then ask them, well, if it's not for you, then do you have anybody that you know? Because again, remember, we talk and we might be able to connect you with a colleague or another company or somebody else who focuses in that space. Does that kind of help? At least that's how I find it to work.
And Joe, do you want to talk? And
Sure.
Penny too.
So here are 3 or 4 things. First, think about not first what you as an educator want, think about first what the business person wants. And there is a company, Target, that has made a strategic decision to invest $500 million in reading. So it doesn't make sense to try to talk to Target about promoting engineering, because they've made a strategic decision to focus on reading. If you want to talk about reading, that's a company to talk with. You want to talk about math and science, this is a company, or there are other companies. So first, don't think about what you want, think about what they want. Secondly, in many of the schools with which we work, we have family student teacher conferences with every youngster, or virtually every youngster in every family before school starts. And that goes to what Cammie said. And in a number of these schools, they have developed what's called a gold mine of family resources. When I was a teacher in one of these schools, we had this. I mentioned that I was teaching a class that fall on Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. A parent said, well, my husband couldn't come to the conference. He works for the tugboat company on the Mississippi River, which flows through St. Paul and Minneapolis. Do you think the kids who are reading Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn would like to be in a tugboat going down the Mississippi River sometime this fall? Yeah. But it's the precise point that Cammie made. One other quick example, we had a very angry parent who hated men in general and didn't like me in particular. And the more I learned about her, the more I learned she had lots of reasons to be angry with men, although I hope not me in particular. But anyway, she was a bank teller at a bank, and she arranged for the kids to come there, and they're a little bit bored with the discussion about math and science. They were 3rd graders, but they loved the vault and the big door that swung open and closed. On the way out, the kids were talking, this is a really pretty bank, get really pretty pictures out here. Suppose they put some of our artwork up on the wall? So the bank vice president, who was really smart, said to the kids, she said, that's a really good idea. Why don't we put some of your art pictures here on the wall, and we'll put some of your math pictures, because we really want you to do well in math. Well, pretty soon the kids did this, aunts and uncles started to come to the bank, and then another bank vice president called the school and said, we want to have a partnership with you. We want to put your stuff up on the walls because lots of people are going to the other bank. So anyway, start with the families is a really good idea. Start with a strategic plan. Think about service clubs, Kiwanis, Rotary, Optimist, and so on. Offer to do something for the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club or the Jack and Jills, or offer to have a singing group come. Offer to have some other group come. Think about what you can do to assist them. Think about what resources you as business people, as educators have. We have provided free workshops for some of the companies that we're working for their employees about how to get into college and courses that allow kids to earn college credit. So we've done workshops at General Mills, at Travelers Insurance, just did one at Target. Free workshops. Many of the high schools in this room have guidance counselors. How about offering a 2-hour session on getting into college for employees of some of your local businesses for free? Is to say, you help us, you help support us, we like to do something with and for you. Instead of saying, we want what you have, say, we want to give back to you. But think about ways that you can get into businesses and say, last point, here is a range of things we're thinking about. Do any of these things interest you based on what we know about your company? So don't just say, here's one thing we want. Here's a list of 5 or 6 things that we're thinking about, which is one of the reasons that I gave you this list. And obviously you have your own ideas, but don't just say there's one thing that we want, because if you go in saying here's the only thing we want, you may miss some incredible opportunities.
I would just add that really the question is about how do you develop a relationship with someone. And I think that often the relationships start out either a teacher and a parent in the class, or it could start out with a principal joining the Chamber of Commerce. And just in the course of the events, the social events, you begin to find out about what that person and the organization that that they work for is interested in doing. And so there's several principals that have joined Chambers of Commerce. They tend to be high school principals that want sites for internships for their students. And so just something like that, really being very strategic about the people that you meet and the locations you're meeting them in, I think is a good start.
And so are there some brave business representatives in the room who are willing to talk a little bit about what to them would be a good strategy for pursuing a partnership? And I know there are some business folks over here. I saw some hands earlier. Yes?
You need me to mic?
Can everybody hear? Yeah.
Okay. The best advice was what Penny gave us this morning about identifying the chamber. And in fact, I'll go back to my experience with your example in Brunswick. There was a parent and a business owner of a small business who was also a county commissioner, but he was first that small business owner and the parent, and that's what drove him to run for office, was his commitment to his family and his community. And he had a personality like the fellow you saw in Joe's video, the CEO, who had a line about go big or get out, something like that. That was his personality on a very different level, but the same style. And he literally would not take no for an answer. And when he got involved, this is how committed he was. He made the county commitment because the local Board of Education there was not interested in this idea of forming a partnership to focus on the college and career connection, and including the business community. They thought they were doing fine. But he got on the county commission, and this is still completely unprecedented in Georgia. He got the county commission to pass a SPLOST, a local option sales tax, for a school that was not connected to the Board of Education or E-SPLOST. It's a county commission economic development SPLOST that mentioned target would be a charter technical high school. And it passed, somebody who doesn't think of him or herself as a champion. And it's probably somebody who's already busy. But you'll find that person if you look hard enough. You may not have to look very hard. Just get the word out that we're going to do this. And don't say we're going to do this yet. Say we're going to do this. And the cream will rise to the top.
Great. Thank you. So I've picked on this side of the room. That means somebody over here. Can you report out on the conversations that you've had? Oh, I think we have a volunteer.
Good afternoon. I'm Nate Colley with Texas Instruments, and I work with a lot of school districts and throughout the state, obviously. And to answer the question about the best successful path, I think, for a good relationship between a business partner and the district or the school is to really identify, just like y'all were saying, identify what your chief goal and vision is. And it could be multiple goals and visions. But then I would listen. If that's something that I can work with and help meet with you, then it's going to be a good business relationship. If it's something that is unrealistic or something that we can't provide from a company standpoint, then I'm going to let you know up front. I'm sorry, that's not in our realm of what we can do as a relationship. So I think what you said about a good way to get that strong relationship is coming out in the open and honestly say, this is what I'd like to do, man. This is what our vision is in a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan. And that's something that we can work with as a business partner, and that's how we do it.
Do we have a volunteer, somebody in the back of the room who can report out on the past 15 or 20 minutes that you spent reflecting on the day so far? I'll start calling on people. The lady in the lilac, is that a lilac jacket? Could, in a sea of dark colors, you stood out.
Well, I think the reflection has been the fact that I think we're on the right track. A lot of the things that we were thinking about, the direction that we wanted to go, was really confirmed in a lot of ways by different things that different people have said. But also was able to kind of clarify or even zero in on some other things to how to make it even better. So just a lot of little tidbits here and there, even giving me the ideas of doing some other things and brainstorming. So this has been a good brainstorming session for me as well.
Great. And I also see 2 ladies over here in some red jackets. So if you wouldn't mind reporting out on your conversations.
Well, actually, we're from the University of Georgia, some of them, and so we were talking to some possible school districts that are interested in working with some of our faculty. We're hearing a lot about the business industry partnership with the school districts, but also institutes of higher education, I think, do have some relevance and some ways we can help. So they're talking to us about some partnership opportunities, and we've already worked with some school districts that applied. So we're trying to hear more about what people need, and also certainly including industry. That's certainly something the university is interested in.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody so much for coming this morning. And can you join me again in thanking our 3 experts up here? And please, please, please take advantage of their attendance. Ask them questions, pull them aside during lunch, strike up a conversation. They are fantastic resources, all 3 of them. Lunch is right outside, right in the hallway, and we'll be back here, I believe, at 1:15. Thank you so much.